get the pony on the road.
Okay, so I'll start my screen share.
Yes. Oh, and for everyone, if you have questions, please do ask either through the chat or just say it out loud. Michael, if they're asking through the chat, I will ask you the questions, okay, so that there's a bit of a banter.
Sure.
Cool.
All right. So I would say let's get started with this topic. What I usually do, I guess you all can see my slide now, right? Perfect. Yep. So I'll give you a brief overview what you can expect from the next, I would say, 30 to 40 minutes, me talking about that topic. So I would assume that you all have some basic knowledge about software architecture, that you have I would say, rather technical background. You don't have to be a seasoned software architect or something like that, or a seasoned developer or something. Maybe you heard a little bit about domain-driven design. I saw a few folks in the participant list who know quite a bit about DDD. I'm pretty sure when I read their names, but you don't need to be an expert in any of these areas at all. I will give you a quick overview about strategic domain-driven design. I'm very well aware that we could easily talk over a day on that topic, and that's what the masterclass is for. What I will not do, this is not going to be an advanced deep dive into this topic. So I will show you some newer stuff and some more modern aspects of strategic DDD, but I will not drill down into the finest, tiniest nuances of those things. So just to introduce myself, my name is Michael Plöth. I work as a fellow at a company called InnoQ, so I'm a consultant trainer. I worked on the German translation of the DDD reference, which has been initially published by Eric Evans. And I am writing on my own domain-driven design book, which is being published on LeanPub. And yeah, I would say, I think it was 13 or 14 years ago, I read Eric Evans' blue book on domain-driven design, and on the first run, I didn't understand anything, or only tiniest little pieces, but I somehow had the feeling that this is interesting stuff, and I stuck to the topic throughout the years. So here I am now, years and years later, talking about these things. And I mean, I think a lot of these things that have been published 16 years ago are now more relevant than ever. And actually, they have been confirmed by the Accelerate book, which has been written by Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humble, and Jean Kim. Yeah, they did a study on what makes a powerful IT delivery organization. And one of the quotes that you will see on, I would say, 20 other DDD presentations by various speakers, yeah, is this quote: "A loosely coupled software architecture and an organization structure to match is a key predictor of continuous delivery performance and the ability to scale the organization and increase performance linearly." And basically, this is pretty much what strategic domain-driven design is all about. I would say, if you would ask me what DDD actually is, I would call it an holistic approach towards software architecture, because it goes way beyond technical aspects. It addresses many cultural and organizational aspects as well, yeah, of a delivery organization. And so when we take a step back from these claims, I would say we can have two perspectives on things we need to solve. You know, let's say for a product or a project or some app or whatever. So we should ask ourselves the question, what problem do we want to solve? What is the problem? That's one thing. And the other thing to take a look at is how do we want to solve that problem? So what I see in many, many organizations, or what I have seen as a consultant of the couple of years ago, is I have seen a lot of discussion about the how, but not so many discussions about the what. And I think in order to produce software or products, whatever we may want to call that, I think we should aim for a very good alignment of the what part and the how part. Yeah. So, but in order to be able to do that, we need a lot of communication between the business domain experts and the folks in the IT. So, I mean, I would say everyone agrees with me that this is a good idea. So if we take a look, then we want to have a very big overlap between software engineering and domain know-how. I would say the bigger the overlap between the two, the better the end result is probably going to be. I think you all witnessed that when you used some, let's say, mobile apps or web applications and so on, and you had the feeling as a user or as a consumer of those things that, how could they solve it like that? This stuff is useless. And you had the guess that the team that created that really hated their customers. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I'm being a bit sarcastic right now. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of truth to that, because in many organizations, this overlap is not very big. And you may say, yeah, of course, we need the big overlap. So let's ask ourselves the popular question, what could possibly go wrong? Let's take a look at that simple example here. So here we have a hotel room. I think that was a hotel in Switzerland, where I had a customer workshop or something like that, and I took that photo. And how would the business name these things in the hotel room? We would have a window, a TV, a trolley, a painting, a desk, and a chair. And now let's take a look at a possible implementation of that hotel room. Yeah. If I look back at a couple of code reviews or architecture reviews that I've done throughout the last few years, I would come across things like, a transparency factory class name, a entertainment provider singleton, a decorator impl, a work enablement device, a rollable stuff container, or a REST provider. Yeah. It's good that they all share the same opinion. This image has been highly inspired by an image in the amazing user story mapping book by Jeff Patton and Luke Barron. Yeah, and so there is a mismatch. Yeah, those folks, they think they talk about the same thing, but do they really talk about the same thing? And I think we should actually go ahead and collaborate in order to be able to really share the same opinion. So digging into the DDD space here, we can take on two different perspectives. One perspective is the problem space. This is, you can call that something like a business architecture, business IT architecture, however you may want to call that. Yeah. Also, a lot of enterprise architects, they talk about something like a problem space. Yeah. So in this space, we want to understand what we want to solve. Yeah? So the building blocks in the strategic DDD area here are the talking about the domain and the subdomains. On the other hand, we have the solution space. There, we talk about how we solve something, AKA, this is about the software architecture. Yeah? So, and what we want to do is that we want to align the software architecture side and the business architecture side together, so that there is a strong alignment between the what and the how. And the corresponding element in the domain-driven design world here is the bounded context. So what you want to achieve between those areas is an alignment that is very big. Yeah. So the bigger, the better the alignment between the problem and the solution space, the better. However, in reality, you will never be perfect. I think you will always see some misalignments here and there, especially when you work with legacy or custom off-the-shelf software or something like that. So please don't try to die in perfection here. So what we want to achieve is something that we want to make the domain the heart of a system. Yeah. So we want to ramp up a system, a software architecture that is driven by the domain. And in order to do that, the domain-driven design world, yeah, has a couple of, I would say, principles that they follow. Yeah. Some of those principles are, for instance, collaborative modeling. I will talk about that in a few slides later. We want to continuously learn. A sentence that I hear very often in the domain-driven design community is, for instance, all models are wrong. Yeah, so basically, what does that mean? Yeah, it doesn't mean that everything is crap. It means that you will continuously learn, and the more you learn, the more different perspectives you get on your current model, and you may want to readjust things. You may want to revamp things based on your learnings. Yeah. We want to focus on linguistic details. I will talk about that later on as well. And we need an exclusive environment for that, where everyone is able to participate, to contribute, be it very technical folks or not technical folks like business domain experts, end users, and something and so on. So if we take a look, for instance, at the lean management, the lean enterprise world, agile product delivery, we can actually say that those values, they can enable a continuous discovery of solutions. So we define a business problem, we may define a desired result, we define our assumption, we write our own first tests, we conduct experiments, we consolidate the results, we discard, modify, keep, and we repeat. Yeah. So this typical build, measure, learn cycle. That's something that we want to circle through heavily. In order to be able to do that, yeah, we shouldn't stick to technical modeling tools, which are very, very popular in many IT organizations. So, for instance, I've seen settings where there was an invitation for a business analysis workshop, and so the business came in, the IT folks were already sitting there, and the business was greeted with the sentence, "Hey, it's awesome that you're here. We've already prepared a workspace in Enterprise Architect. Which UML diagram do we want to start with?" And the business folks were like, "What's that? Never heard about that. What are those diagrams?" And I saw the rolling eyes on the IT. Oh, the business, they know nothing about IT. Digitalization. Year 2020. Hello, business. Don't be so old school. I'm exaggerating right now a little bit, and I'm being a bit sarcastic, but in the end, it boils down to a lot of these things. So what's going to happen in those workshops? Nothing is going to come out of that, because everyone is going to play it safe. So you only get the stuff where everyone agrees on that this is right, and not some assumptions or things where you have to take a risk, because the business would be afraid to risk a change request. And then there's fixed price projects for external vendors and stuff like that, and things take long. So what we want to do is, we want to make sure that those workshops where we collaborate, that they are inclusive, that there is no entrance barrier for everyone involved. Yeah. Not through technical tooling or stuff like that. Yeah. And we want to use techniques for collaborative modeling. If we wind down the time in the DDD world, in Eric Evans' book, Eric already sketched out that we should ask smart questions, we should go ahead and practice active listening techniques and so on. However, the domain-driven design community has progressed a lot in that area. So there are now very popular techniques, stuff like event storming, domain storytelling. Those are basically techniques and ways to collaborate, which I would say originated from the domain-driven design community. Event storming came from Alberto Brandolini. The domain storytelling stuff came from Henning Schwentner, Stefan Hofer, Carola Lilienthal from the company WPS in Germany. and they are all rather very active members of the domain-driven design community. However, the community is also taking a look at the work in other communities. Let's take a look at example mapping from the behavior-driven development community, or user story mapping from, I would say, the Agile community. Why did I write Scrum there? Because Scrum works a lot with user stories, and you can use that in that area. And a lot of people know Scrum, but you don't need to do Scrum in order to do user story mapping. And so you can take a look at those things. I won't dive deep into those collaborative modeling techniques now, because I want to focus more on the building blocks of the strategic design. But they help us in understanding, in getting a good understanding of the problem domain. So we want to understand what is in there. How are the boundaries of our problem domain? What do we need to solve? What are other folks solving, for instance? And it is very important that we get a common understanding. No one wants to run into a situation where someone says to me, say, that was obvious. Why didn't you know that you need to solve that problem, for instance? And that's what we want to do there. However, the problem domain is a bigger construct. We need to segment that into subdomains. So basically, each problem domain contains a bunch of subdomains. They are lower level business capabilities. And what I want to focus on in the problem space are business capabilities. So what's the capability of the business that we need to solve? And also here, you work with collaborative modeling. So maybe some of you have heard about event storming things, or have performed an event storming, something like that. And maybe you have heard about stuff like swim lanes or pivotal events. Those things may be your first indicators for boundaries of those subdomains. However, I would always prefer modern collaborative modeling techniques over UML, BPMN, sorry about the typo on the slide, or other technical tools for that. And we want to iterate over those things. Your first draft will not be your perfect draft. However, please do not go ahead and iterate endlessly in that loop. Sometimes you need to go ahead and verify your results and verify your assumptions by writing code. Eric Evans published something like a model the model exploration whirlpool, where he said we identify scenarios, ramp up a model, we circle around scenario model, and then sooner or later we go to a code probe. I will get to that later on. Currently, we're in the first loop here. Those are things that a lot of enterprise architects also talk about. However, the domain-driven design community has one more twist to the subdomains here. There are categories for those subdomains. So the first thing is that you have a core subdomain. That's your most important stuff. The heart of your organization's business. There you want to differentiate against competitors. But please be aware that you want to be able to uphold the differentiation midterm, not just short term, because if this stuff is not very complex, it's easy for others to copy. The solution, and the differentiation is gone when everyone is copying those things. The next category are the supporting subdomains. They are vital for operating your core subdomains. However, there is a lack of strategic relevance with regards to the competition. So either those supporting subdomains, there's a medium degree of differentiation that you can do, or the complexity is not so high so that it would be easier for others to copy that. And the last one are the generic subdomains. I call them sometimes, ironically, the necessary evil. You need them, but there's no way to differentiate. Those are total commodity, and there are a lot of solutions on the market for that stuff, but we're not looking at that yet. But you need something for a given problem. Now, what can we do with those categories? Eric Evans was once quoted with the sentence, "Not all parts of a system will be well designed." To be honest, I have never seen a system that has been perfectly designed from start to finish. Never in my career. And I think I never will. And I think that applies to most of the listeners in this webinar as well. So, however, what I have also witnessed happening very often, that quality of a solution or a process very often happens randomly, depending on who was available on the market, the opportunistic staffing and so on. And wouldn't it be nice if we could have a little bit more of control on that? So what we can do is we can derive some staffing, make or buy decisions for IT procurement as well, based on those things. So in the core subdomain, I want to have excellent teams with excellent working conditions. Those folks need to be able to solve stuff fast in quick iterations. I want to have a very strong in-house development here, not 100% outsourced stuff. And if we want to differentiate, using custom off-the-shelf software may not be the best idea. In Germany, we say it's standard software. So a standard is not a key driver for differentiation. Of course, you can go ahead and adjust and expand that kind of software, but that brings its own risks. On the other hand, in the supporting subdomain, you can go with some external support, some nearshore development maybe. You can use some custom off-the-shelf software if you want. But on the generic subdomain, my preferred thing would be some SaaS solutions or something like that. So in the end, I would be willing to spend a lot of money on the core domain, and the budget sinks. And the same goes with the focus. So now about the problem space. Let's take a look at the solution space. So let's take a look at this example. Now we have identified a couple of subdomains, and we realized in this example, there is something that's a retail, let's say, mortgage loan application that we want to build. We want to sell some credits, and there's that form that folks need to fill out. However, credit decisions depend on information from that. The loan applications obviously depend on it. The scoring depends on it. Contracting depends on it. So one thing that we have done in the IT throughout the years is we built a centralized domain model. Reuse everything, reuse everywhere. Economies of scale above everything. However, if we look a little bit deeper, and this is now something where I want to talk about those linguistic nuances, which I mentioned earlier. How do the domain experts in those different areas talk about that form? Of course, the loan applications, they talk about the form. However, scoring talks about rule clusters, for instance, where they group rules together based on certain specific information from that form. The credit decision ramps up a decision template for the C-level of the bank. Or contracting talks about a contract proposal or a contract. So from application, represented as a loan application form, to a contract proposal, to a contract. And this is where the bounded context comes into play. I would define a bounded context as a linguistic boundary around the meaning of a domain model. Now, within a subdomain, you can have bounded contexts. In an ideal world, in a perfect world, you would aim for a one-to-one match, a one-to-one alignment between both. The better the solution space is aligned to the problem space, the clearer the coupling, the more independent the teams get, and so on. So, however, you often will find out that you came up with a rather coarse-grained cut for subdomains when talking about the problem space, the what we want to solve. But when you take a closer look, finding a solution, you will gather more insights into these things. And so you will realize, I may have 2 bounded contexts in that subdomain, or 3 bounded contexts, or 1. So if you look at the credit decision on this on this slide, perfect. Yeah, that looks good. However, contracting scoring, you may want to give that feedback to the problem space again, yeah, and readjust those things. So you could say that, I would say, a bounded context in the solution space has a short to mid-term stability, whereas the subdomains, yeah, you're rather looking at a mid to long-term stability. However, you should have a feedback cycle between the two. Now, what I'm talking here is basically about decentralization. And if you ask me what is the key driver in the IT landscape nowadays, I would say it's decentralization of a lot of things. And under that umbrella, many trends or many popular topics will pop up. Let's take a look at Agile Principles, or some processes, if you like them or not, different story. They actually try to decentralize the way that products get built. If you look at DevOps, you want to decentralize certain operational aspects. If you look at continuous deliveries, at principles behind continuous delivery, you want to decentralize certain testing capabilities so that you're no longer dependent on a single central testing team that is conducting regression testing or something like that. And if you look at microservice architectures, for instance, the same stuff applies. The bounded context, and I think this is the key driver why domain-driven design is so popular nowadays, gives you a way to decentralize the modeling of domain models. So you can find individual solutions, and you can make your domain models more explicit, so they are better suited to fulfill capabilities within a bounded context. With that, the teams will sooner or later get a better understanding. And I sometimes talk about the mental model. So that's the thinking about a certain problem. It will align between the business folks and the developers. I think a lot of the times when developers, including me a couple of years ago, complained about certain new feature requests from the business, it was due to the fact that I had a totally different way of thinking about the problem that I was supposed to solve as a developer than the business. And the closer we get, the more, I think, maintainable our code will actually be. Now, we can also do more work in parallel, and we can go for different implementation options. Now, if you take those 4 arguments on the right side and replace the blue arrow on the left side, for instance, with self-contained systems or microservices, that would be a pitch where everyone would say, that's a pretty decent fit here. And this is also why this approach of modeling things is so popular in this area of software architecture. But how do we identify bounded context? Now, one of the key drivers is obviously language, but I would broaden the look, and I would involve people like domain experts, UX experts, maybe a facilitator or something like that, and take on different perspectives. For instance, I want to take a look at capabilities and responsibilities, informational actions and stuff like that. Nick Thune wrote that very nicely down in his blog post, which I'll mention on the next slide. Business policies, what are important rules, what are validations, what are policies, invariants, ubiquitous language, key actors, important verbs, and a perspective that I personally also like to take on when I look for boundaries in the solution space are quality criteria. Now, take a look at ISO 25010. How about scalability? Are there different scalability requirements, different performance requirements, different change frequencies, and so on. We built something for the solution space. And I think, especially when we aim for microservices architectures, that should be a very interesting perspective. Nick Tune summarized those things in a series of really amazing blog posts, which I highly recommend. That was published, I think it was in July 2019. I think Nick is in the audience as well. I think I've seen him in the participant list. And that's the third version of his bounded context canvas, where you can, this is very similar to a business model canvas, what you do on the business side of things, in order to sketch out or sharpen the boundaries of your bounded context. I highly recommend you to read those blog posts. Now, there's one more thing. You should also mind the amount of teams and people you have available as well. Michael Nygaard was once quoted that team assignments are the first draft of the architecture. Now, if we look at that bounded context model, and let's say we want to spread 50 people to build the teams, how do we distribute them? What I see very often is something like that. But I think the icon on the right side is a better approach to that. So a couple of things to keep in mind. 5 to 9 people per team. Mind the cognitive load of the team. We want to go ahead that teams can design, build, and run their own stuff. The typical cross-functional teams that we often hear about in the software architecture and product development area right now. We should also keep in mind how the communication bandwidth between the teams look. And you can take a look at the subdomains as well. Mind the categories of the subdomains. I want to have a perfect staffing in my core subdomains. On the generic one, I'm ready to take a couple of trade-offs maybe. A book that I have enjoyed reading a lot last year was Team Topologies by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace. And a very nice quote in that book is, an architect should be thinking which team interaction modes are appropriate for these two teams. What kind of communication do we need between these two parts of the system, between these two teams? And they have defined a couple of categories for teams, like an enabling team, which is something like an in-house consulting team, stream-aligned teams that deliver a lot of business value, complicated subsystem teams where a lot of special knowledge is required. For instance, you see that very often in legacy applications, in large monolithic things, and platform teams, which ramp up platforms which you can use per API. That can be continuous delivery, DevOps, PaaS, whatever platforms, but it can also be business platforms. Think about sending and receiving letters and stuff like that. The letter one you often will find in the generic subdomains. And then you have a couple of interaction modes, like this part here that's acts as a service. Here you have here you have a strong collaboration between the teams, and this team is being supported by the enabling team, for instance. Very interesting read. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to dig deeper into this book, but a very big recommendation from my side. Very good literature. And I want to change back to the DDD world. I think the team topology stuff is a really good starter. However, we can take a deeper look. We can take a look, defined by the context map in the early blue book by Eric Evans, where we can have patterns for connection between software and business capabilities. And the context map aims to give you a very deep insight about this kind of coupling. If we take a look at various interactions between bounded contexts and teams, the easiest thing that we always look at is something like a call flow. System X calls service provided by System A. System B publishes a bunch of events which are being consumed by a handful of other systems. Those are diagrams you will find in a lot of the architecture documentations. However, we can dig deeper. how do the domain models propagate through those flows? Yeah? Which team conforms to something? Which team translates a model into their own representation, for instance? Yeah? Those two things, we can find them in the code. The other two aspects, such as team communication and politics, or an influence of actions, is something that aren't very visible in the code. Yeah? They are part of an organization's DNA, yeah? About the way that an organization works. Now, where should the context maps help? On the one hand, with the governance. Yeah, we can start building a decentralized governance with context maps. We can visualize politics, yeah, by not just looking at technical integration aspects, but also, yeah, we can visualize how teams play politics, how they communicate, how they can interact with each other. We can see how bad models propagate, yeah, through a grown IT landscape. And we can use that as a very powerful tool for planning IT transformations. Now, if I look at the dependencies on a team level, yeah, we can see teams that are mutually dependent. Yeah. They need to coordinate their efforts a lot. Yeah. Often their releases, their testing, and so on. We see teams which are free, so there is not a lot of coordination required between the two. And we have upstream, downstream teams where the action of one team has an impact on another team, but the other team can do whatever they want without impacting, yeah, the upstream team. Yeah. I'll give you a brief overview about some of the context map patterns. We could talk 2 hours about those alone. So there's, for instance, the open host service, which is something like an API. So basically the context map has, I think there's 9 patterns, yeah, surrounding the context map. And in the bigger books, the community knows a couple of more of those patterns, but they are loosely written down. And I'll go through 6 of them now very, very briefly. Yeah. So one is the open host service. Yeah, that's always upstream, public API. On the other hand, on the downstream, yeah, you can translate to your own model with an anti-corruption layer. Yeah. There could be a published language, something like iCalendar, vCard, for instance. Yeah? A definition of a model where others can translate into and out to. The different, a conformist is one team totally conforms to the model of another team. Yeah? The shared kernel is even stronger. Yeah? They share artifacts such as a shared database schema, shared jar file, shared DLL, or something like that. Or a customer supplier, yeah, where a downstream team can make requests to an upstream team. So, hey, we need that functionality. We need to have additional fields in a form or something like that. And they succeed with that. And with that, we can visualize different perspectives. Yeah, the call relationship. A first level of the team relationship, here we have an upstream, downstream relationship. An API level with the customer supplier, with the open host service, a model propagation view with the anti-corruption layer, for instance, and a deeper insight into the team relationship. Okay, there is a customer supplier relationship. I'm not so sure if a customer supplier relationship against an open host service is a very good idea. Yeah? Those are the nuances and the details. I think the context map is a very powerful tool. Yeah, because you can make implicitly hidden organizational processes visible. Yeah, you can identify the flow of bad domain models, and you can establish a decentralized governance model with that. Context map is all about Conway's law, basically. Yeah. So to round up my talk, yeah, when we go ahead and put together the problem space represented with the problem domain and the subdomain, the solution space represented by the bounded context, and organizational aspects represented by team topologies or context maps. And when we find a perfect alignment of those two, I think we have a very good indicator that the stuff that we built goes in a pretty good direction. Yeah? So to sum that up, DDD is a holistic approach to software architecture. It goes way beyond technical aspects We address cultural, organizational aspects of a delivery organization as well. So if you're interested to dig deeper into that over a whole day, you can join the masterclass. You can also read my book. I have a voucher here. I'll publish the slides later on, so you don't need to take a screenshot of that code. It will be shared in Speaker Deck, and you can follow me on Twitter. And I think we have a bunch of, I'll share the slides later on Twitter as well. And we have time for a bunch of questions and hopefully answers as well. I'll stop the screen share now, okay?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I just got the question, where to ask questions. So if you are a panelist, you can unmute yourself and ask questions. Then you can also ask the questions in the chat and in the Q&A. So there are several different possibilities. So
I already read a question.
Oh, okay, go for it.
By Gerhard in private. Michael, how can I host modern collaborative modeling techniques in a co-located company? I think there are a couple of web-based tools out there right now. Stuff like Mural, Concept Board, Miro, and so on. I think that would be a good starter. I made some pretty decent experiences with them. And I would also recommend you to read the blog post by Alberto Brandolini. He wrote a couple of weeks ago about experiences with remote event storming. The virtual DDD community has a YouTube video up where they tried remote event storming, which can also be a very interesting thing. And I think Nick Thune published today something about remote facilitation. I saw something roughly on Twitter today, didn't read it yet, didn't have the time, but maybe you want to check out this as well.
Nick, if you are here, which I think you are, you may post your link into the chat. Okay. Okay, so should I just ask the questions as they come in?
Sure.
Okay, so Paulus asks, how is the relation between context maps and customer journeys?
That's a very good question. I think what I personally like to do is I like to combine user story mapping and event storming together. Yeah. I like to take different perspectives. And I'm not a fan of just going with one tool and saying that's the silver bullet that solves everything. And I think there you can draw very nice parallels in order to identify bounded contexts. And then I would take a look how the user journeys relate to that and which context mapping patterns are suitable, especially on the team relationship side. Yeah, but also maybe you have certain elements of a customer journey which are highly regulated, for instance, where you calculate certain values which are under strong, let's say, banking or insurance regulation. Then you may want to look into the conformist pattern. I mean, this is a pattern which introduces a pretty deep coupling. Sometimes that's desirable.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
That's a good answer. Thank you.
It's a good answer. Okay, so James asks if there are any suggestions for how to introduce domain-driven design strategy into an established SAS product organization.
Do you think about building the SaaS product, in terms of product development, or about the organization in general? I'm not so sure about that. If you could clarify that, that would be very nice.
James? Let me see if James has it. So it says here SaaS/product organization. So separate. if that, I don't know.
Okay, let me give a best guess answer. In terms of product building, when you want to ramp up an innovative product, what I always would look at is what is the rest of the market doing in terms of the supporting subdomain. Maybe you can out innovate them here, yeah, with something like a core that is way more innovative, a key differentiator or something like that. If you talk about the organizational aspects, I would say there are many cultural things that go hand in hand. I mean, if you want to transform your organization towards agile delivery methods, design thinking, for instance, what a lot of the business folks like to do, then I would say the DDD toolkit goes hand in hand with that. Yeah, so I think you can, what I always look at when I'm at customers is the business doing design thinking. And then I go over to them and say, hey, we've got something on the IT side that fits perfectly in there. Let's collaborate and build better prototypes, for instance. Yeah. So that can also be a good strategy for that.
Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question? I hope so. Jakob asks, it seems that DDD is about teaching business to the devs. Does that also apply in reverse? For example, teaching business people about dev issues? If so, which dev issue would be relevant to the business?
I would say absolutely yes. And I wouldn't call it teaching. I would call it getting to know each other better. The more you collaborate, the more empathy you get for the other side. And I think you learn a lot about the thinking of the business, their processes, their needs. But through the collaboration, the business obviously will learn why, for instance, writing tests is a good idea and not just a waste of money, or why refactoring is not just technical playing around, but actually about building business value in the mid to long term and also in the short term as well. And I think a better understanding will arise on both sides of the end.
Okay. How can you evaluate the transformation from the problem space to the solution space?
Yeah, Christian Johansson also said Marco Heineshoff touches on that quite a bit. That's true. There's also, I think, a YouTube link on stuff that Marco has done. I think in terms of the evaluation, for me, this is always an iterative process. Yeah, so it's not just a waterfall-y approach. Yeah, we do the problem space, problem domain, subdomains, solution space, development, test, delivery, and then we're done. You're never done. And I think this evaluation, yeah, you learned something in the solution space, and you want to feed that back into the problem space, yeah, sooner or later. Yeah. Of course, the implementation on the solution side will be deployed when you're not there on the problem side yet, but I would basically go ahead and have a constant feedback between the two perspectives. And also always keep in mind that, yeah, they are there. What I often see is that teams forget about the problem space when they are in delivery mode, and don't do that.
Thank you. We have a product cover. So James is saying we have a product covering multiple domains and they're currently highly coupled. And we have struggled to get teams organized around the domain areas because of that coupling. What to do?
Okay. Yeah, classic. Yeah, you're not alone. In the reality, what I would suggest is really start off maybe with something like a big picture event storming, and maybe you can identify good bounded contexts, and then do a what would be a good ideal solution. Where are you right now? Context maps will help you, and team topologies will help you a lot with that. I do that quite regularly with customers of mine. And then you can ramp up a transformation plan, how you can go ahead and solve the coupling. But those are hard problems. Yeah, that's nothing you solve overnight by boom, applying the magic DDD wand to that problem. There will be a lot of iterations going on, a lot of hard thinking, and yeah, iterations as well, in my eyes.
Okay. Biko is asking, you mentioned earlier that you prefer modern modeling techniques over traditional techniques such as UML, etc. Does this mean that UML isn't useful for understanding or communicating to technical team members familiar with UML, the intricacies of DDD, or at least aid in discovering a ubiquitous language?
I think they address different problems. I think UML is a suitable thing for communicating technical aspects to technical people. Yes, absolutely. If you, for instance, look at Simon Brown's C4 model, I think there are a lot of UML kind of things in his model for communicating software architectures. Great stuff, really good. I would just say that UML is not a suitable tool for getting a shared understanding between domain experts and developers. Yeah, it's not an exploration tool, I would say. Yeah, use the right tool for the job.
Okay, why not BPMN?
Basically the same thing as UML. Yeah, basically I think BPMN is a suitable thing to communicate processes. Yeah, but I don't think BPMN is a really good tool to explore processes. To be honest, yes, I understand the promise, yeah, that domain folks are able to draw their processes with BPMN, but to be honest, I've never seen that happening successfully. And most of the time it's been the technical folks drawing the diagrams and the other are just looking there, oh, what are they doing? I think I would rather prefer going for event storming, domain storytelling first, and then document the understanding in BPMN if you want. If you see that there is an advantage to that.
Mm-hmm. I have a question in the Q&A here from Rasmus. Do you have good examples of companies in finance or banking sector, preferably in Northern Europe, who are leaders in applying DDD successfully?
I can't tell names of my customers due to NDAs and some stuff. Maybe I think in general, in terms of Agile and so on, for instance, ING has done some interesting things. Yeah, they talk about that publicly as well. Yes, there are banks out there, and I work with some. Basically, I have a very strong banking IT background. Spent half of my career in banks, but unfortunately, I have NDAs, so I can't tell the names. But yeah, ING has been very public about what they've done, and I would also take a look at some of the younger banks in the fintech sector. Yeah, there's some interesting stuff being done there as well.
Cool. How exactly you combine team topologies and bounded contexts in terms of facing
the previous one, I think.
Sorry? Ooh, oh yes, I skipped one. Ooh, pardon me. Thank you, Paulus. Okay, sorry, Martin. How does DDD fit in an agile development process? Is it part of the retrospective? When and where would you revisit the bounded context, domain model, etc.?
I would say DDD thrives in an agile setting. You lose a lot, if not 90% of the advantages of DDD if you would squeeze it into a waterfall approach. So basically, domain-driven. If you look at the values, in my book, I, for instance, dissected the Agile Manifesto. yeah, all the statements from the Agile Manifesto, and put them against the values of the DDD community. And with many, yeah, of those points, I would say check, 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 check. Yeah, the cultural ideas, they are the same. A retrospective is more about a process improvement in the Agile area. I would say talking about user stories, identifying user stories. Yeah, this is something that goes hand in hand with a lot of the practices in the DDD space. And I think it also gives the product owner a chance to get closer to the team and get a deeper understanding on what is happening on the development side of things as well. So I would say domain-driven design goes hand in hand with all of the Agile ideas. That's a very good way to incrementally improve and develop software architectures aligned to the business as well.
Maybe if I can add to that is I think that revisiting the business aspects would be mostly done in a refinement session. You're right that retrospective is for process refinement in general, but you have refinement sessions in Agile, and that would be a logical place for evaluate product context and things like that. I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, I have one more question. Back to the one. So Eduardo is asking how exactly you combine team topologies and bounded contexts in terms of phasing of thinkings. Team topologies talk about the team first approach and cognitive load. How do you combine that with the DDD elements?
I would say the bounded context is a team first boundary. I think they even mentioned that in the book. I'm not quite sure, but I think they did. Yeah. So basically, yes, they do. Eduardo said that. Yeah, exactly. So basically, in order to ramp up, yeah, good boundaries for teams, yeah, you need to have something. And the starter that they recommended in the book was find team first boundaries, and that boundary, a good candidate, is obviously the bounded context. So one of the things that you can take a look at when cutting bounded or when defining bounded context is the cognitive load. Is the stuff that is in there suitable for a 5 to 9 person team, or is it too much, or is it too small maybe? Yeah, so that's something that, yeah, one person can do over a weekend or something. Then I would say maybe that's a little bit too small as a boundary there. Yeah, so I think this goes hand in hand. Yeah, so I would also keep in mind cognitive load and all these concepts when modeling bounded context. And I think modeling bounded context is all about looking at a problem from different perspectives, yeah, and then finding a good compromise. You will always need to do a certain compromise when you do these kinds of modelings. Yeah, there's rare cases where you say, that's the perfect solution, that's the silver bullet, and that's it. And it's always about dealing with trade-offs. And you need to know how to trade them off.
Okay. Christian is asking, what is your experience with project versus product teams and short versus long-lived?
I mean, a product team, I would call them a cross-functional team. Yeah, this is obviously something that works very, very well in that area. In terms of the product teams, yeah, or the project teams, yeah, what I very often see is that you have a development team that is ramping up something as a project, and then in the other hand you have a maintenance team, yeah, that is doing the maintenance. Yeah, very often the maintenance team is in-house and the development teams or the development is being outsourced to external vendors. Yeah, that's what I see very often here, and this is a hard thing, yeah, because you will never establish a clear ownership about certain things. And yeah, you will have this mentality among those teams. Yeah, we ramp that up, and when it's gone to production, we do a little bit of 2 weeks after go live support, and then we're gone. So I think you will never be able to really, revisit your model in this setting. And I think a lot of the things get lost in that way. And for instance, if you look at the Accelerate book, one thing that they found out in their studies about powerful IT delivery organizations is that IT outsourcing is not a very good idea in areas that are strategic to your business. So basically, this has been the full confirmation of everything that the DDD has claimed for the core subdomains for 16 years already. Yeah, so please be aware of the trade-off and communicate it to the management. I think those things are aspects that managers may want to care about.
Okay. So is the team to bounded context best left as one-to-one, or can it be one-to-many?
I would say one-to-one is the best cut, obviously. As a trade-off, you can go ahead and have one team that owns 2 or 3 bounded contexts. That's possible, yes. But what I would want to avoid is when one bounded context is being owned by 2 or 3 teams, yeah, especially when they are from other parts of the organization, from external vendors, because what then strikes is Conway's law. And I once heard, I think I read that sentence on Twitter that said, you can't do Conway's law. Conway's law does you. And this is exactly what's happening there. Yeah. So basically, when you have this setting, this context will grow apart and in a pretty uncontrolled manner. And I don't think that you want to be in that situation.
Does it make sense to introduce DDD or parts of DDD on a team level, or does it only make sense on the level of the whole development department?
I don't see DDD as a all or nothing approach. I see domain-driven design as a toolkit with various tools in there. Some of the tools, they will obviously only work on an, I wouldn't even call it development department level, on an organizational level. Other tools you can easily adopt on a team level within your team, even if the rest of the organization is not doing those things.
Okay. So now everyone is sort of wanting to run, as it's 10 past already. I just have one thing on the Q&A. Julie just said, I think the answer to that deep NDA issue is just yes.
Yes. Hi, Julie.
Okay, you know. Okay. So are there any more questions from anyone?
The chat, there are a few.
A few? Okay, well then, how about you join the masterclass, or
just hit me up on Twitter or whatever.
Or, exactly. Did you share your Twitter handle?
Yes. It's,
okay.
I'll put it in the
chat.
In the chat as well.
Wonderful. I just want to mention you have named so many people throughout your talk, and I just want to say almost all of them have been at a GoTo conference, and I know them personally.
Great.
So also lots of questions here, and you were talking about YouTube videos. I'm pretty sure most of you know, but we do have a YouTube channel where all our talks of the conference are recorded and shown. So I will post that link here as well. So you'll find basically everything or every name that Michael has dropped, you'll find on our YouTube channel as well. So yeah, if you have any questions, shoot him a tweet, and if you have any questions to me, you will get an email from me personally after this, and then just ask me as well. And yeah, so basically everyone is super happy and saying thanks a lot for the great talk. I want to thank you for joining me. on this go-to afternoon, and I want to say thank you to all of you for joining as well. This has been incredible. This has been the fullest go-to night ever, I think. So